2 notes, same sender, same day, same inbox. The first one says Nancy Guthrie is dead. The second one says she was seen alive in Mexico. Both arrived on the morning of April 14th, day 66 of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. And both landed not at the FBI field office, not at the Pima County Sheriff's Department, not at any law enforcement agency in the United States. They landed at TMZ. And that single detail, where those notes were sent, tells you almost everything you need to know before you even read a word of what's inside them. But there's more. A lot more. Because this isn't the first time someone has been writing to TMZ about this case. This has been going on since February 11th. Weeks of messages, weeks of demands, weeks of claims that keep shifting in ways that don't add up. And now, on the exact morning that Savannah Guthrie walked back onto the Today Show for the first time since her mother was taken, 2 more notes. Same person. Same inbox. Saying 2 things that cannot both be true at the same time. Let's go through all of it carefully. Because something about this case just changed, and not in the way anyone was hoping. Nancy Guthrie, mother of NBC Today Show anchor Savannah Guthrie, disappeared on February 1st. She was 73 years old, living in Tucson, Arizona. Within 2 days of her disappearance, a ransom note arrived. Not at a media outlet, not on social media, but at the family's home. It demanded $6 million in Bitcoin. It contained details about the abduction that had not been made public. What Nancy was wearing, specific details about how she was taken. Details that only someone present at the scene would know. Savannah Guthrie said publicly on March 26th that she believes those 2 notes her family received were real. The FBI agreed they were worth taking seriously. Agents tracked the Bitcoin wallet attached to that demand. They contacted Mexican authorities. They treated those notes as legitimate evidence from someone with genuine knowledge of the crime. That's the baseline. That's what a real ransom note in a real kidnapping case looks like. Private. Specific. Delivered directly to the people it's meant for. Full of details nobody else could have known. Now keep that picture in your head. Because what came next looks completely different. On February 11th, 10 days after Nancy disappeared, a note arrived at TMZ. Not the family. Not the FBI. TMZ. The sender wasn't claiming to be the kidnapper. They were claiming to know who the kidnapper was. And they wanted 1 Bitcoin, roughly $43,000 at the time, in exchange for a name. Then more notes followed, and more after that. The demands kept coming. And with each new message, something interesting happened. The price went down. 1 Bitcoin became $70,000. Then $70,000 became $35,000. The original ransom the family received was $6 million. By April 14th, the same information. Supposedly the location of Nancy's body, the identity of her kidnappers, the place where they're hiding, was being offered for $35,000. The price of what this person claims to know has dropped by more than 99% in 2 months. Think about that for a moment. And then think about the notes that arrived on April 14th, Massic. The first one states plainly that Nancy Guthrie is no longer alive. The sender says they know where her body is. They say they know who the kidnappers are and where they're currently located. They want half the payment, approximately $17,500 in Bitcoin, deposited before they share any of this information, and the second half after a public arrest has been made. They also say, for what it's worth, that they had nothing to do with the crime, that they've been living outside the United States for more than 5 years, that they're not motivated by greed. They just want to quietly restart their life. Then, a few hours later, the second note arrives. Same sender. Same day. Same inbox. I saw her alive with them in the state of Sonora, Mexico. Sonora is a real place. It's a Mexican state that shares a border with Arizona. It's roughly 70 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home in Tucson. And this is the first time, across all the weeks of messages, across all the claims and demands, that any of these notes has mentioned a specific location. A real border state. A real geographic detail. That detail matters. It's the kind of thing that makes you stop and pay attention. But here is the problem that no amount of geographic specificity can get around. The first note says she is dead. The second note says she was seen alive. The same person wrote both on the same day. One of those statements is a lie. And if this sender is lying about one of the 2 most fundamental facts in the entire case, is Nancy Guthrie alive or is she dead? Then there is no logical reason to trust anything else they've written. Jason Pack is a retired FBI supervisory special agent. He has spent decades studying exactly these kinds of communications. Ransom notes, witness letters, extortion attempts, cases where someone on the outside of a crime tries to insert themselves into the investigation. When he reviewed these new notes, he identified 3 immediate red flags. The first was the timing. These notes arrived on the exact morning that Savannah Guthrie returned to national television after 2 months away. Pack's assessment was direct. Real witnesses don't track the news cycle. If someone genuinely had information about Nancy's location or condition, they would not sit on that information for weeks and then choose the most publicly visible moment to come forward. They would call the FBI. They would call Crime Stoppers. They would not time their disclosure to coincide with the daughter's emotional return to work. The second red flag was the contradiction itself. Dead and alive are not 2 interpretations of the same situation. They are mutually exclusive. One of them is false. And a sender who can't keep their own story consistent within a single day of messaging is not a credible source of information about anything. The third red flag was the method. Real witnesses contact law enforcement. They don't negotiate through entertainment media. They don't ask for Bitcoin in exchange for a body location. Every structural choice this sender has made. The outlet they wrote to, the format of their demands, the payment method they requested. Points away from someone with genuine knowledge and toward someone who has been watching this case from the outside and decided to try to profit from it. TMZ themselves used a specific word to describe this sender. Incessant. Not occasional. Not sporadic. Incessant. This person has been writing to them repeatedly since February 11th. Nearly 2 months of messages. And in all that time, across all those notes and all those claims and all those shifting demands, the FBI has not publicly acted on a single one of them. No search in Sonora. No arrest based on a name provided. No press conference announcing a breakthrough tied to any of these communications. And the Bitcoin wallet the sender provided with their most recent notes. 0 transactions. Completely empty. Nobody has deposited a single cent. If this person genuinely had information worth $35,000, information about the location of a missing grandmother whose family has offered $1.2 million in reward money, you would expect someone to have paid by now. Nobody has. And that silence around that wallet is its own kind of answer, Jennifer Coffindaffer, a retired FBI special agent who has followed this case closely, responded to the new notes without hesitation. She called them fraudulent, not questionable, not uncertain, not worth investigating further. Fraudulent. Her assessment was that this sender has no real information and is attempting to extract money from a case that has captured the country's attention. The Pima County Sheriff's Office gave the response they always give. All tips and leads are taken seriously and passed to detectives working with the FBI. That's a careful, professional, completely non-committal statement that tells you very little. What does tell you something is the absence of any action that followed. No raids. No public statements. No movement in Sonora. Nothing that suggests law enforcement looked at these notes and saw anything credible enough to act on. Here's what makes the pattern visible when you lay everything out side by side. The notes that arrived at the Guthrie family home came early. Within 2 days of the disappearance. They were private. They contained specific details that weren't public. They came with a demand significant enough to suggest someone who understood the value of what they claimed to have. The FBI took them seriously. They tracked the wallets. They contacted Mexico. The notes that have been arriving at TMZ since February 11th came later. They came to a media company, not a law enforcement agency. They contain contradictions. The demands have dropped from $6 million to $35,000 across 2 months. The claims have escalated. From knowing a name, to knowing a location, to claiming Nancy is dead, to claiming she was seen alive. While the credibility of the sender has moved in exactly the opposite direction. 2 separate senders, 2 entirely different patterns. And the FBI's response to each. Active investigation in one case, complete silence in the other. Tells you which set of notes they believe has weight. Here's the thing that gets lost every time one of these notes generates headlines. Each time a fraudulent note gets attention, it creates noise around the real investigation. It pulls focus. It gives people false hope or false despair, depending on which note they read first. It gives everyone involved, including the person or people who actually took Nancy Guthrie, a moment to breathe while everyone else is busy processing a contradiction that was never meant to make sense. Whoever is writing these notes, TMZ may not know anything. They may be sitting somewhere watching this story unfold and deciding that $35,000 is worth the risk of a few deceptive messages to a celebrity news outlet. That is a cynical calculation made against the backdrop of a real family's real suffering. A daughter who went back to work on national television after 2 months away from a camera she used to love. A grandmother who has been missing for 66 days. A family that has been living inside this nightmare while someone they've never met writes notes that contradict themselves and then waits for a Bitcoin deposit that never comes. The question isn't really whether these particular notes are credible. The former FBI agents who have reviewed them have already answered that. The question is what it means that someone looked at this case, at this family, at this level of pain, and decided it was an opportunity. And the question underneath that one is the harder one. The one that the FBI is still working on. The one that the $1.2 million reward hasn't answered. The one that 66 days of silence from whoever actually has Nancy Guthrie hasn't resolved. Where is she? That question hasn't changed. It hasn't been answered by a single note sent to TMZ. And it won't be, because the person writing those notes doesn't know the answer any more than we do. The person who knows the answer isn't writing to TMZ. They're not asking for $35,000. They're not contradicting themselves in the same day's messages. They're somewhere else entirely. And finding them is the only thing that actually matters.